If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. People, what are your creepiest, most inexplicable, supernatural life experiences? I get night terrors or sleep paralysis sometimes, usually before I get up or right after I fall asleep, but I haven't gotten into that deep sleep yet. So it still feels like I'm mildly aware of my surroundings. It doesn't last long, but it's that in-between feeling. Sometimes when people talk to me when I'm in that half-sleep phase and I respond, I'll always respond with plural pronouns. We're almost up or we're still in bed, that sort of thing. When people then ask me why I'm using those pronouns, I'll say something like we're all together, or my friends are here. It was definitely weird at summer camp when I was a kid or in the college dorms, but it's one of those things that's weird but becomes pretty normal and easy to forget. Early on in college, while I was probably taking too many classes, I had started regularly taking these 20-minute naps in between studying. I'm not sure if I ever actually slept, but it was nice to have a few minutes to not study. When I did this, though, I would end up in that quasi-sleep state. And I'd start to see people, or maybe figures, right at the edge of my peripheral. They'd look like people I knew. But their faces were always a little bit blurry or very severe looking, like they had been awake for a few days straight. The creepy thing, though, is that they'd always start in my peripheral vision and then begin to loom closer. I knew about sleep paralysis at the time, so I figured it was creepy but just something weird my brain was doing. And I didn't think much of it. Well, at least until the next time I was home. I told my dad about my weird half-dreams. He got very quiet and told me he had them too. Almost every night, if he didn't go right to sleep. It's been a few years since college. I noticed that it doesn't happen as much if I'm sharing a bed. I mostly try to ignore it, but I definitely drink a bit more coffee and avoid naps. It was Christmas Day, and I was 9 when we drove to my grandparents' house. My grandparents lived in a community that wasn't gated but still required you to drive through the entrance of the community, turn right, drive down 2 blocks of houses, and then turn left to get to their house. We had just turned right when we drove past a house that still had their Halloween decorations up. I pointed this out to my mom, and she told me not to look at that house anymore and to look straight ahead until we arrived at my grandparents' house. Later on, I realized that the Halloween decoration of a life-sized man in a suit hanging by a rope from the tree in the front yard was no decoration. I was in the Alps with some university pals to do some field work for our botany exam. We were staying in a refuge in the middle of nowhere, at 1,400 meters of altitude and a 40-minute drive away from the nearest town, which was literally composed of 20 houses, the smallest supermarket ever, and a pharmacy. Anyway, we had an area of 15 kilometers by 15 kilometers to work in, which was a good distance away from the refuge in the middle of the woods. We were walking in the woods when, out of nowhere, we found ourselves in front of a house that was clearly inhabited, smoke coming out of the chimney and clothes hung to dry outside, but wasn't on the map we had. This map was really well made and included even the smallest and most ruined buildings to avoid people getting lost in the woods. We thought it was weird that this house wasn't on our map, but we kept walking towards it because we had an exam to pass. As we approached the house, we noticed a doll's head on a pike in the front lawn. We got really creeped out, took a picture to show the refuge owner, and quickly got the duck out of there. Turns out the refuge owner, who knew the area really well, didn't even know there was a house there. Creepy shit. I live in a mountain town in southern Pennsylvania, in an area where most of the houses are about a half-mile apart. When I was younger, I used to walk up the road to my friend's house and walk back home, always before the sun set. The road was lined with woods until you got to my house. On this one night in the summer, I stayed way later than I normally do. I don't think I started walking home until around 11. There's a little bridge on the road that goes over a small stream. As I was walking across the bridge, I heard splashing, like something was running in the water. Scared the SHT out of me. It sounded big, so I assumed it was either a bear, a mountain lion, or a hermit living in the woods. I was a stupid, scared 12-year-old, so of course I started running down the road to my house. About halfway down, I saw something huge in the middle of the road and stopped. It was too dark to make out any features. It looked like it was an animal. I could kind of make out 4 legs, but I had no idea what they could have been. It stunk, though, kind of like rotten meat. I was probably 20 yards away, but I could still smell it. I wasn't sure if it saw me or not, and I was about to turn around to go back to my friend's house when the most disturbing sound came from it. The best way I can describe it is like a mix of a cicada screaming and a man coughing. That did it for me. I sprinted back to my friend's house as fast as I could, trying not to throw up from being so terrified. I told her parents what happened, they drove me home, and that was that. I never saw whatever it was again, and nobody I told knew what it was that I saw. My best guess is that it was a diseased animal of some sort. I was a security coordinator for a large electric company and had access to, like 80+ facilities CCTV infrastructures. I was doing a maintenance check on some random train station at like 3 a.m., panned a camera as far to the right as possible to check that it was functioning, and this dude was on all fours eating a deer in the middle of the tracks. I watched him for like 10 minutes and went to get the other guy on shift. When I came back, the dude was gone. Rewound it, and the dude stopped munching on the carcass, wiped the gore off his face, and walked into the woods like he didn't have a care in the world. I was driving near Peggy's Cove one night around 2 a.m. with the oldest brother. It's pretty isolated there are very few houses or people in the area. Drive by this young man hitchhiking. He's got a huge duffel bag and is walking with a bit of a limp. We drive by him and immediately start saying we should turn around to get him because it's so late, he's probably pretty sore, and who knows where he's even walking from. So turn around and drive back to get him. We pass no other cars. And there's absolutely no one on the road. We drove by where we saw him. No one was there. We drive another 2 or 3 kilometers past that. And no one was there. We turn ourselves back around and drive by again, still looking for this guy. Absolutely nowhere to be found. I still get shivers when I think about that night. There's no reasonable explanation for where that guy could have disappeared in such a short window of time in the middle of nowhere. Many years ago, someone told me a story about how they got a bit lost while traveling between states. Somehow or other, they ended up on a seldom used county road out in the boondocks. This was before cell phones or GPS were common, so as the evening got on, they decided to ask for directions at the first house they came across. An old 2-story farmhouse type, but not abandoned looking or anything. They parked along the side of the road and began the long walk up to the front door. They said there was no driveway connecting the house to the road, just a gravel footpath. It sounds stereotypical, but about halfway there, they started getting a funny feeling, like there was something wrong or off about this place. That's when they noticed someone staring out a window on the second story. Close enough to see it was a thin masculine figure, too far away to make out any facial details. Only this man was upside down in the window. As if gravity had flipped and he was standing on the ceiling. Just standing there and staring. They stopped in their tracks, confused. After a minute, the man moved back from the window, turned, and disappeared in kind of a herky-jerky fashion from waist to head, like they were descending, ascending? An inverted staircase. I told them it was probably just a couple of mirrors in the room creating the effect, but they said it freaked them out so bad that they ran full speed back to the car and drove off. Even though there's a logical explanation, that story has always stuck with me. I live in the deep mountains. I'm talking about a 45-minute drive to the nearest small town. We are nearly completely isolated and surrounded on all sides by thousands of acres of national forest. It is the real deal to live there, and it is not uncommon for large predators to roam through our property, such as grizzlies, lions, wolves, etc. To help combat this, my wife and I have several large shepherd dogs that roam the property. They do an excellent job rerouting wildlife around the property, marking it, and just being good survival companions. If something goes bump in the night, either the dogs freak out or they don't. After a while, you learn to interpret their barking and growling, from batshit panic when a bear is outside to annoyed I'm trying to sleep yapping when a raccoon gets in the trash. Still, you never get fully used to them barking in the night. There's always a what if in the back of your head. Well, I let them inside to eat at night or when it's too cold to be outside. One December evening, my wife and I had them in and were watching Planet Earth. No big deal, we're all a big, happy family gathered around the TV. My shepherd loves to watch television and see all the cool animals. We had watched several episodes, and they never made a peep when they saw sharks, elephants, komodos, hyenas, blah, blah. Then came the mountain episode, and they were on high alert but still calm. Until they cut to a night vision scene of a mountain lion stalking in the dark, they all lost it. I nearly knocked over the TV trying to attack it. Our youngest pup, still 80 pounds, jumped on our laps and was visibly shaking, barking, and growling at full tilt. It was unnerving, to say the least. We get lions around here, but to see how keen the dogs were on just a clip of one really demonstrated not only the fact that they were intimately familiar with the threat, but that they instinctively knew what one looked like prowling in the night. It was an inherent threat, and they not only knew it but were scared to death of it. We had watched hundreds of hours of shows with them and never once got that reaction before. Alright, thanks for sticking with me this far. Here's the SHT your pants scary part of the story. I really don't even like writing it because the whole thing still freaks us out to this day. We are again all inside on a cold winter night. My wife and I plop down to watch some TV, and the dogs gather around intently. I decide to throw on a stupid alien documentary my friend recommended. The dogs watch closely but seem normal. Then the documentary shows some supposed pictures of graylings lurking in the night. The dogs ducking lose it. Worse than the mountain lions. Holy SHT, we have to turn the TV off to stop the dogs from destroying the house, and even then they are all super freaked out, tucked tails, whimpering, the works. Again, we watch TV with them all the ducking time, and nothing has ever riled them up, let alone full panic, except for these two instances. After we calmed the dogs down, my wife and I sat in silence for a long while as the horror slowly washed over us. That what if when you hear the dogs freaking out in the middle of the night apparently could be aliens. Not ducking. Cool. My sister is 4 years older than me. This is relevant later. About a year before I was born, my dad built a house in the country for our family. So I'm 4 years old and playing downstairs with mom, and I decided to go get a toy from my room upstairs. My bedroom was small, only about 12 by 12. The door opened to the left, and my closet had French doors, which opened from the middle outward. So when the bedroom door was open at the same time as my closet's left side door, it formed a little square space that was blocked off behind each at a 90-degree angle. As I walked into the room, I heard something rustle and exhale like an animal in the space behind the two doors. I turned and looked, and the image was seared into my little kid brain. A green, scaly, demonic-looking creature was crouched behind the door. It was small, maybe only 4 feet tall, but had red eyes and yellow, sharp teeth. The green, scaly, bumpy skin was weird and hard to describe. The grayish-green shade was sickening, like the color itself gave me a visceral reaction. Being so young, I didn't exactly understand what I felt, but the creature gave off a vibe that it didn't want to just hurt me, it wanted to tear me to shreds and destroy me. It didn't growl but kind of shifted its crouch and flashed its teeth when we made eye contact. I lost my SHT and went screaming, sprinting out of my room and downstairs to my mom. Mom was a teacher, and one of the calmest, most logical people I've ever known. She went into mom/teacher mode and sat me down at the kitchen table with paper and crayons to draw what I'd seen. She told me something like, "When we draw what we're afraid of, we can see it's not scary." Mom got me calmed down enough to draw the creature while she worked in the kitchen. When I was done, I called for her to come look. When she saw the drawing, she immediately made some dismissive comment like, "See, that's not something real, it was only your imagination." But her tone and demeanor had changed. She grabbed the picture off the table and walked out of the room with it. I calmed down, and we didn't speak about the green demon thing again. 14 or 15 years later, I don't remember exactly, but I was either 18 or 19 and a freshman in college. I was home eating dinner with mom, my older sister, and my girlfriend from school. We were talking about memories from the old house. We'd since moved away. I said, "Mom, do you remember when I thought I saw that green demon thing? It was like someone had sucked the air out of the room." Mom got quiet, and my sister said something like, "Wait, you saw it too?" Mom then told me it was the most frightened she'd ever seen me as a kid, and my sister had seen the same thing in the same spot when she was 4 and I was a newborn. Mom had actually done the same let's draw what we're afraid of exercise with my sister and kept the 2 pictures that we drew. Mom found both drawings when she moved again about a year later. My sister and I were helping with the move, and Mom showed them to both of us. They were clearly 4-year-old artifacts but shared the same exact features: skin color, scales, red eyes, etc. When I was in college, I would go visit my boyfriend over the weekend in another city, where he studied. It was a half-hour away, and sometimes his roommate's girlfriend would give me a ride back on Sundays since my college was on her way home. Once, we all had dinner pretty late, and she decided to leave at 5 a.m. on Monday and offered me a ride. She always dropped me off at the beginning of a long avenue, so that she would have to leave the main road, and I would walk for 20 minutes to get to my apartment. I took the ride because I never thought about how early it was or how dark that avenue got at night. Anyway, I get out and start walking fast because I was a little freaked out by how empty and dark all the streets are. Now, the avenue is really broad, like 6 lanes, and while I'm walking, I noticed in the corner of my eye that there was someone walking at the same speed as me. When I looked at him, I saw that it was a guy, dressed in a full white suit with a hat, but he was walking very weirdly, with very short steps, almost as if his feet were tied together. The weirdest part was that even walking like this, he was moving super fast, at the exact same pace as me. His face has something off. I couldn't see properly because I was far away, but I could swear that he had a big smile on his face. I've never run so fast in my life. So, a few years ago, I hiked the Appalachian Trail. Towards the end, I did a ton of solo night hiking because, even in nature, I have a ducked up sleep schedule, so I more or less hiked for 4 to 5 hours every night after dark. One night, as I was walking near a lake, I saw a few lights off to my right, maybe 50 feet away. They seemed to be along the bank of the lake. This was odd for a few reasons. First, this was the middle of a pretty desolate stretch of woods, maybe 3 days hike to the nearest road crossing. Second, the lights were unlike any I'd seen before. I don't really have the words to describe how they were different, but here's what I got. They were extremely intense. Brighter by far than those generated by a headlamp. They gave off no light. This was particularly strange. It was like looking at heated crystals or something. Imagine a very bright light in total darkness, but one that doesn't illuminate anything around it. Anyway, I was pretty confused and decided to turn off my headlamp and walk through the foliage towards the lights. As soon as I got close, maybe 15 feet away, the lights shut off. The second they went off, I heard an enormous crash and splash in the lake. And I mean ducking huge. It sounded like a cannonball hitting the surface of the water. So at this point I was super sketched out and basically jogged or ran the duck out of there and didn't stop until I hit a shelter a couple miles down the trail. So, a couple days pass, and I tell a bunch of other hikers the story, and we come up with some possible explanations, but nothing really comes of it. Then, a week or so later, I'm staying at a shelter and telling the story, and this guy starts freaking out. He tells me that about a week ago he and his friends passed a makeshift cabin or barn next to a big lake, and the door had a chain link on it, which was weird because no one lives anywhere near this area. So, even though they couldn't get inside, they turned on their lights and took a peek inside. And all over, apparently written like 50 times, like some deranged person from a horror movie took to the walls with chalk, it said, "Don't follow the lights." I later had his story confirmed and expanded upon by his friends, who he was with. That's it, kids. Weird SHT in Nowhere, Maine. A few years ago, I was house sitting, well, farm sitting, for the family of a friend of mine who is 1 year younger than me. She was moving to college at the north end of the state, and the whole family was going to move her into her new dorm. The family is mom, dad, her, and 5 younger siblings, so this relatively small farm is usually well staffed. They easily have 8 to 10 acres of usable land in southeastern Indiana with horses, a large garden, chickens, goats, rabbits, etc. Oh, and like 4 dogs, one of which is a huge Mastiff mix or something like that. This dog is huge, like literally the size of a full-grown bear, the same color, and isn't friendly with most people because he's very protective of the land. Herein lies part of the reason I was watching their house. For whatever reason, this dog loved me, and I was willing to come out to their place a day early to learn all of the daily chores that I would need to do. To help develop an image of this place, you can see the house of their nearest neighbor from their front porch, but it's across the horse pasture up by the gravel road you come in on and easily a kilometer or 2 away. I think it would probably take a solid 15 to 20 minutes to diligently walk there. Anyway, so I spent one night there with them after spending a day learning the do's and don'ts, and that was fine. They left early the next morning, and I got to work, which took about 2 hours on my own. The job was honestly really easy once the daily chores were finished, pretty much just sit around and relax, accompany the dogs, bring in the mail, and whatnot. The first night came quickly, and I'd heard their drive went well, so I spent the evening on the couch watching TV with the dogs. My sleeping arrangements were also in the living room on a futon, so I was half sleepily lounging around and, at some point, I must have dozed off. I woke up to the beast of a dog laying his head on my chest at about 3 a.m. in the pitch black of the dead of night. My first thought was he needed to go outside, so I got up and put on my shoes, but that's when I noticed he had gone from my side to cowering and whining in the corner of the house opposite the front door. I stood up to check on him and then realized it was really cold, especially for a college-age guy my size wearing pajama pants and a t-shirt in early August. This chill was accompanied by the most eerie feeling of dread that I've probably ever experienced to this day. I found it physically difficult to walk, as it felt like time was moving slowly. However, I eventually made it to the dog and petted him a few times to try to calm him down, but he seemed inconsolable. I walked to the thermostat in the hallway, and it read 37°F inside, even though the outside temperature was easily still in the 70s. I moved towards the front door and peered outside through a window, but there was a light cloud cover and it was so dark that I couldn't see anything, so I flipped on the porch light. The light wasn't enough to see very far into the pasture, so I wasn't too concerned that I couldn't see the horses, but I could see much of the driveway area, and right in the midst of it stood a cloaked humanoid figure that seemed completely unfazed by the porch light. I froze. It didn't seem aggressive and wasn't carrying any obvious weapons, but I'm thoroughly convinced after staring at it for 5 or 10 seconds that this thing was not human. The father of my friend is low-key one of those doomsday preppers, but more realistic in that he prepares for things like EMPs, nukes, solar flares, etc. Nonetheless, he has a SHT ton of firearms around the house, all thoroughly locked up outside of my use, except for one fully loaded 9mm pistol in the master bedroom that he gave me the key for and told me was for emergencies only. I ran to the room as fast as I could and got the pistol, but by the time I returned to the door, the figure was gone. I saw that the dog was still in the corner but had stopped whimpering for the time being. I turned on a bunch of lights in the house, still carrying the pistol, and returned to the couch where the dog had moved while I was walking around. I was still shaking and completely unsure of what to expect next, but then, just as suddenly as everything else happened, the feeling of dread subsided. The dog wagged his tail a couple times and licked my hand, and the thermostat now read a comfortable 72°F even though the heater had never kicked on. I managed to gather my thoughts and lay down again after about 20 to 30 minutes of deep breathing. I eventually fell asleep again. I woke up to my alarm at something like 8 a.m. and realized what I had hoped to be a dream couldn't have been because all of the lights were still on and the pistol was sitting on the coffee table with the safety off. I eventually worked up the courage to step outside and start my chores, but I couldn't help but investigate the dirt driveway a little. Near the place I thought the thing would have been standing, I found the shape of 2 bare feet with no footprints leading to or from them and no other marks one would expect in a footprint, i.e., toe prints, wrinkles, etc. I have no idea to this day what it was that stood outside the door that night or have any explanation for the entire event. All I know is that it spooked me enough that I invited my brother to come spend the subsequent, and final, night with me when, luckily, nothing happened. I never told my friend or her parents because I thought for sure they'd think I was crazy and stop associating with me. Unfortunately, I have sort of lost contact with them now anyway. Maybe I'll reach out to them sometime, but I don't know. My family lived in a very haunted house growing up. Most of the time, whatever was there just wanted to make you run, they never touched you or caused harm. My siblings, and even family friends, can name every weird thing in every room. Multiple people would see or interact with the same odd things in the same places. But then there was Shadow Dad, as we called him. My brother saw him first. He was going to the restroom in the middle of the night, and when he came out to go down the hall to his room, from behind he heard something running for him. He took off, sprinting into the room and bolting up the ladder of his high bunk bed. The thing grabbed his ankle and tried to yank him down. My brother, screaming bloody murder, kicked and flailed but made it up. Looking back down, he saw my dad. But pitch black. His arms were a little longer, and his hands looked wrong. Then Shadow Dad walked away. My little sister was, as we joke, a demon as a kid. At 4 years old, she was not afraid of the dark, of being alone, or of going into the basement. She would regularly disappear for hours, and when asked where she went, she would reply that she was playing with her friends in the basement. They only come out when the lights are off. Horrifying, right? She was the kid who would walk to get water at midnight without turning on lights or even running up the stairs. She would say terrifying things about her friends in the basement, like the long horse lady. But one day, she wouldn't go anywhere alone. She had to turn on every light. She wouldn't go to sleep without someone with her. She would cry when she needed something at night. When we asked her what happened, all she would say was, "Shadow Dad got me." I asked her a few weeks ago if she remembered, and she told me she remembered loving her friends and then one day being afraid. She remembered Shadow Dad chasing her. She thinks he got her, but she doesn't have a clear memory. Whatever Shadow Dad did or whatever happened, it changed her forever. It was a 1950s Rambler, of all things. We know that the people who built the place had a mentally disabled son who died in the house in his 40s, but he was somewhere around 3rd grade mentally, basically a child. We also know that the house was on the market for a long time before my parents bought it. I've been told, but haven't confirmed, that when it finally sold, the family that moved in lived there for less than a year, then moved out and put the house on the market for a steal. My parents snapped it up and lived there for close to 30 years. Growing up in the house, it was like the shadows were always moving. Some of them were aggressive, some of them were not, but one shadow showed up time and time again, a shadow of what seemed to me at the time to be a rather large man. He wasn't that tall, maybe 5 feet 8 inches, but he was thick. I'm a big comic book fan, and he reminded me of a disheveled kingpin. That shadow was a troublemaker. He would stand outside the bathroom door and lunge at you as you exited. If you were transporting a hot pan from the stove to the sink or from the oven to the dining room, he would lunge at you like he was going to knock the pan out of your hands. In the yard, He would hide around a mimosa tree and lunge at you while you were mowing the yard. One time I was so startled that I jumped off the riding mower and tripped. The mower had a butt sensor and stopped immediately, thank goodness. After that, I mowed that area with a push mower. He would spook me in the shower, at night when I was trying to sleep, if I was home alone watching television, etc. In this house, we had a game room that was a nicely converted garage. My sister was scared of that room and wouldn't go in there at night without anyone with her. Strange stuff happened in that room. The lights would turn on for no reason. The television in there would turn on. There were 2 closets in there, both with double bifold doors. The doors would fling open, and stuff would hurl out of the closet. The door to the game room was oriented so that you could see from the doorway into the sitting area of the living room, where we mostly watched TV. We usually kept this door completely shut, but sometimes we would hear jiggling on the doorknob, and the door would open just a sliver, like someone was watching us in the other room. One time, my sister brought home her boyfriend from college, and he slept on the couch in the living room. He said in the middle of the night he heard the door to the game room open, stuff being moved around in the dark, and the light in the game room come on. He sat up in a panic, just in time to see a chair move, one of the closet doors open on its own, and a couple of piles of sewing fabric get thrown on the floor. My mother has been a lifelong fabric collector. She used to be a pretty good seamstress. The guy was scared half to death, refused to sleep in the house again, and broke up with my sister soon after. We all got an uneasy chuckle out of the whole thing. That was over 15 years ago, probably closer to 20 years now. My sisters and I are grown now with our own kids, and we all live a long way from that house. I barely think about the stuff I saw growing up there. A few years ago, though, my sister was visiting our parents, who only moved out of the house recently, with her son and 2 daughters, and her oldest daughter suddenly started. My sister asked her what was wrong, and she said, "Mommy, why does that man like to scare me?" "What man, honey?" "The man who likes to stand outside of the bathroom door." I lost a full 3 hours over the course of what should have been about 30 minutes. Me and my friends were camping at a recreational area that was about 10 minutes from the nearest town. We ran out of hot dogs and buns, so we were all pretty starving. Me and 2 other friends elected to drive down to the town and drive back. A quick 30-minute drive that would have had us happily around the campfire in no time. We pile in, drive down, grab exactly what we need, and head back. As soon as we get to camp, we're being yelled at by our friends, who claim that we were gone for almost 3 to 4 hours and that they would have starved to death had we not arrived. We were confused, as we had practically rushed to and from the grocery store with the supplies. Hell, the hot dogs still felt like they were just barely taken out of the fridge. Most confusing moment of our lives. In a time of deep emotional distress in my life, I wandered into a church. I was feeling helpless and hopeless and couldn't think of anywhere else to go. I'm an agnostic, so church isn't exactly my comfort zone, but at the time I worked downtown, there was this really beautiful ancient Catholic church down there. I was pregnant, and I'd had an appointment that day, and they'd said I was going to have an amniocentesis test done. I was terrified and felt very, very lost. I was just wandering around downtown, sad as hell, trying to think of what to do. And I found myself outside the church, so I went in. I wandered up towards the front and slid pretty far down to the end. I was trying to have some privacy as I just poured myself out. I tucked myself in at the end of this pew and cried and cried. I don't remember any prayers. No clear thoughts, just grief and fear for my baby that manifested as this deep mournful crying. And then, this incredible warmth washed over me. It literally felt like someone poured warm water over me, starting at the top of my head. I remember being startled by the sensation. It flowed over my entire body. I calmed down almost immediately, my mind cleared, and I felt confident that whatever happened was going to be okay. And it was. That was 25 years ago, and the baby is now a very happy, healthy grown man. I'm still not religious. But something comforted me that day, and whatever it was, I can't explain it, but it was real. And I'm grateful. My mini Shar-Pei broke off my leash and ran into the woods near my house when I was walking him. I have acres of forest behind my house and have never explored 90% of it, so I was pretty nervous thinking I might lose him in the woods. Anyway, it was pouring rain, and I had to trudge through wet mud and countless tree branches to find him. Luckily, he had a bell on his collar, so I could hear him. I had been walking through the forest for a good 20 minutes and was pretty damn lost at that point. I heard the bell ringing stop, which meant my dog had finally stopped running. I traced the echo of the ring and turned a corner to an almost cave-like area with lots of big boulders, completely different from anything I've seen near my house. The first thing I noticed immediately was that everything had turned very warm, almost hot. This was April in Canada, so it was still very cold out. The second thing I saw was that many of the boulders had spiral-like drawings on them. They looked like they were drawn with charcoal. I walked behind one of the rocks, and right in front of me is a glass door, like a very expensive-looking door you'd find on a modern suburban home. The door was just standing there, frame and all. I peered down, and there's my dog. He wasn't out of breath from running or checking his surroundings, though. He was peacefully ducking asleep on a pile of leaves right in front of the door. My dog rarely sleeps during the day and never outside, so this was bizarre as shit. Frustrated at my dog for making me walk that far out, I simply woke him up, leashed him back, and took him back the way I came, not getting lost somehow. It took until about a day later to realize how freaking weird the whole situation was. Part of me wants to see if I can find and explore that area again, but man, I get such an unsettling feeling thinking about it in retrospect. It's like I wandered into somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. This is coming from somebody who gets scared easily. A few years ago, I went camping. I don't really believe that much in paranormal stuff, but it's still scary to me. It's super late, everybody in the tent is asleep, but I get up to grab some water. My water bottle was empty, so I slipped outside to fill it up and heard something walking around. I kind of laughed to myself and tried to over-exaggerate the situation to make it feel less scary. Wow, what if that was a skinwalker? I better run. How scary. And stuff like that. I hear the footsteps getting closer and see a deer. I think the deer had antlers. Anyway, I finish filling up my water and decide to stand and watch the deer for a bit. I'm watching the deer, and it looks up at me. We make eye contact. The deer are still kind of far away, definitely not inside the camp, a little outside of our camp, so I start walking back to the tent and assume I just scared them away with the eye contact. I look back, and oddly, the deer is on its back legs. I swear, it began disturbingly standing as a human. I heard it start to make a weird noise that sounds like a cry. I rushed back into my tent, as most people would do after a deer started standing and acting as a human. To this day, I swear I saw a skinwalker. When I was around 8 to 9 years old, it was the first time my parents let me stay home alone since they were out doing something, dinner or something of that sort. I can't remember exactly. It was around 10 o'clock to 10:30 p.m., I would say, as it was very dark outside. I heard some weird scratching and whispering sounds coming from downstairs. My room was on the top floor, and I was starting to get a little antsy. I opened my door and exited my room. The scratching was getting louder, and the whispering was getting more intense. For whatever reason, just about every light in the house was turned off, so when I exited my room, it was pretty much pitch black in the hallway, aside from the light coming from my room. I went out into the hallway and flipped the switch on, the light turned on, and the scratching and whispering noises suddenly just stopped altogether. I looked down the stairs, and I saw a hand and arm curve around the corner leading into the living room, and it started to make a sort of come-hither motion with its finger. Keep in mind that this hand was incredibly disproportionate to what a normal human hand should look like. The fingers were way too long, and the nails were massive. The entire situation was just wrong, and I was absolutely terrified. I just ran back into my room and hid in the closet for the next half hour until my parents got home. When they arrived, they called me back down, and I was incredibly disturbed to find numerous tiny scratch marks etched into the ceiling and walls right beneath my room. I asked my parents if they had been home for a while, and of course they said that they hadn't. I tried to explain what happened, but I doubt that they believed me at all. I still get a weird and deeply disturbed feeling when approaching stairs, which is an odd fear, to say the least. This is easily the strangest thing I have ever experienced, and it still doesn't make sense to me to think about it now. Something disguised itself as our dog. Started when my husband woke up in the middle of the night to see our dog at the foot of our bed. Their eyes were dark, and their mouth didn't look quite right, but other than that, they looked exactly like our dog, Noodle. This thing spoke in a deep voice and said, "Go back to sleep, I'll see you in the morning," repeatedly. Our household was hearing unexplained growling throughout the night coming from the hallways around 3am. Both dogs were asleep near us, so it wasn't them. My husband would see this thing a few more times in the middle of the night with our dogs. At one point, I saw it myself. Had my dogs been locked up in the room while we ate, from the corner of my eye, I could see my dog peeking around the corner of the hallway that led to our room. I thought the boys somehow got out of the room, so I checked on them. Nothing is in the hallway, and the door is still closed. At random times, our dog's hair will stand up, and they'll growl and bark and do seemingly nothing. My husband cleaned the house but didn't work. My roommate did it, and it went away, so maybe it was attached to her? Anyway, I still can't explain this. Never heard of a spirit, demon, or whatever disguising itself as a pet? Nearly 20 years ago, my best friend and I were camping with my family. A place we had both basically grown up at, so we knew the location quite well. Anyhow, being the delinquents we were, we both left the campsite around midnight to smoke a joint. We walked 5 minutes to a park that was on the ocean, with a dense forest jutting up against it. We are on the beach when we finish smoking and are enjoying the stars for a few minutes when we both notice something about 150 feet up the beach along the forest trail. I still have a hard time describing what we saw. Approximately 6 orbs of light appear on the trail, which runs parallel to the beach. They form a horizontal line and start moving towards us. These lights are orbs, and unlike a flashlight, they do not project any light. No beams like a flashlight, no area like a candle, none of the trees nearby lit up. They were more of a white light than the orange of a candle. Upon seeing them move towards us, we are both filled with an immediate sense of dread and decide we're not sticking around. We hightailed it out of there. My friend glanced over while we were running perpendicular to the location, and he insists he saw them form a circle and hover down to the ground. Upon discussing it for a bit, we go back armed with weapons and flashlights to see, and there is nothing to note. I have to iterate that this was not in a location where fireflies reside, and even if there was a human element behind these lights, they were moving towards us at a pace people couldn't possibly move through a wooded forest in pitch darkness. I'm in my 30s now with a family, and whenever I see my friend, we still talk about it and shake our heads just trying to explain it. I used to live in a house that backed onto a cemetery. It was nice, had lots of nature, and was quiet. At this point, I had been living there for 3 years, and nothing weird had ever happened. One night, while I was making dinner, I heard knocking at my back door. I freeze, as no one should be in the backyard. I carefully walk towards the door, pausing halfway there. The knocking turns into someone slamming their hand against the door. I pick up my fencing épée and walk towards the door. I pull the curtains back to reveal no one. I open the door and look around, but no one is out there. I look down to see mud on the concrete. I try to brush it off when I hear water running in my bathroom. I hold my sword in front of me and walk towards my bathroom. Again, no one, but the sink is on. I turn it off before searching the whole house and find nothing. I don't think of it, and I eat my dinner and then watch some TV. Again, I hear knocking, this time at my front door. I open it up, and it's my neighbor. He looked mad and demanded to know what kind of joke I was playing. Confused as duck, I ask him what he means. He said his son saw a woman climbing over the shared part of our fence, and he assumed it was me. I told him about the knocking and my sink being on, and he told me if I tried anything again, he would call the cops on me. I decided then that I should be done for the night. Around 1 a.m., I hear someone pounding on the back door, and this time a female voice says, "Help. My husband is trying to kill me." I immediately ran and threw open the door again, to no one. I search around my yard and find nothing. I tried to go back to bed, but I couldn't. That morning I went to have breakfast in my backyard when I heard someone in the cemetery talking about how he had been caught and would be charged. Curious, I walk into the cemetery and see a fresh grave. I look at the temporary name card and Google the name. It turns out that buried behind my yard was a woman who was murdered by her husband. I stand there staring at the mound of dirt, wondering why she did all that. I went back to my house, and nothing ever happened again. I still think about that night. My parents were friends with an older couple who owned a few rental properties near the university that I was attending. One of these properties was about 20 minutes outside of the university in a semi-rural area. It was on several acres of land by itself, so no neighbors were visible through the trees. It had been badly treated by the previous family that lived there and was basically unrentable. So they allowed me to stay there rent-free while I fixed the place up. So I spent the first few months there alone in the woods in between studies, scrubbing, painting, repairing, and replacing stuff on the property. One night, after I had the place looking pretty good, I had a girlfriend over. We were watching a movie in my bedroom, which was at the end of the hallway. The other end of the hallway was the kitchen, and I always left the light over the sink on. In addition, the front porch light was on too, and both sources of light could be seen from the room. So we're on my bed doing some serious making out in various stages of undress when suddenly the lights coming into the room go dark, and instantly, and I mean instantly, the room temperature drops about 20 degrees. It was a warm summer night in the 70s, and it dropped into what felt like the 50s. Both of us sat straight up and tried to look down the hallway, but it was pure darkness. Not just pure darkness, but the kind that absorbs and swallows light. There was this heavy, dark presence in the room that had us paralyzed with fear. We could feel hatred and anger emanating from the doorway. I'm getting goosebumps just typing this and thinking about it. Then, after about 30 seconds, it vanished. The warmth and light rushed back into the room, and they were gone. We both grabbed our stuff, jumped in her car, and went back to her place. I didn't go back to that house for 3 days, and nothing else ever happened there again. Insomniac here. It became ritual to wake up between 2 and 3 a.m. I'd lay there in the dark, on my phone, listening to music, staring at the ceiling, whatever, until my alarm went off at 5. Trying to get the sleep I was missing only made me cranky. So, I'd just stay up. Because the insomnia led to other occurrences, I found myself in my mom's room most nights. She didn't sleep there all that often, so I'd sleep in the middle of her king-sized mattress. Other nights, I'd sleep on a pallet on the floor. On this particular night, sometime after I had laid down, my mom squeezed herself onto the mattress too. Being the light sleeper I am, I acted like it didn't wake me up. I've always slept in close proximity to my family, so her presence, and snores, lulled me into a good sleep. The witching hour came, as it always does, and I was awake. I'm not talking, I'm groggy. Why am I awake? No, I'm talking awake. As though I hadn't been laying in bed the last 6 or so hours. As though someone shot a low dose of adrenaline into my heart, nothing new. In a matter of seconds, in my awake state, I noticed several things. There was an awful odor, and the room was so dark, I couldn't even make out shapes or shadows. Despite the blue LED screen shining relentlessly, it was like it and I were in a void. Even without my glasses, in the night, I can see the shapes of the wide closet, her 2 dressers, the coat rack, etc. The coat rack, my eyes landed on where it should have been hung. Somehow, I could see the corner, but it was in that corner. Not the spooky ass gutter clown, no. I just don't have a word for what I saw. I'm sure it was a demon. Had to have been. There was a glowing red, as though it had opened its eyes to look back at me. Smoke pooled out of its ember orifices, it snarled, emitting more smoke. It smelled of sulfur. I couldn't speak. I couldn't cry. I then remembered my mom next to me. I couldn't wake her. I tucked myself up close to her. I held tightly to her pajamas, closed my eyes, and prayed. I could feel it circling the bed before giving up. I'm not fooling you, I'm 100% honest when I say that demon thing only wanted me. Something about her kept them away. This happened in Mexico about 15 years ago. I used to live in a gated community where big politicians, very rich people, and a few narcos lived. I mean houses that go over $2 million in Mexico. As you can imagine, security in this place was through the roof. Every person that came to meet you had to register their ID, and they would search your car too. They would call your house to know if you wanted them to come through, or you could just send them away before they even came near your house. Security guards have big guns and rifles, and the entrance is bulletproof. Every evening the guards would patrol and check every house that was under construction to make sure that no worker stayed behind, no house cleaning ladies, unless they actually lived in your house, no one after 6 p.m., only residents. That being said, my best friend and I used to walk all over the place at night to chill out so our parents wouldn't overhear our conversations, teenage drama. One night, as we were walking along a side street, I saw a man dressed in typical Mexican garments, white linen pants and a serape, looking from the entrance of a house to an open window in the second floor. I remember because he was very focused, and I am nosy and wanted to know what he was looking at. I honestly didn't think this was weird. It was almost midnight, and this man was just outside a house. As we walked near him, I said good night to him, but he didn't reply. My friend, seeing this, stomped his feet, as to call his attention, and echoed my good night. Man, did I ever wish he had kept his mouth shut? The man who up to this moment had kept his face away from him turned around, and that was when we realized this was no man. His eyes were black on the whites, sclera, and had a deep red colored iris. The same as a person who has been punched in the eyes but without the trauma to the skin. We suddenly felt as if we were going to be dragged down to hell. To say we ran and prayed all the way back to my house is a bit of an understatement. There was no way that this was a man, the clothes didn't match the time, the security guards wouldn't have left him stay until midnight, the eyes were filled with fury and dark red and black, and the feeling was that it was all wrong. So wrong. During summer break, I would be in the house alone while my parents were at work. I was sitting in the family room watching TV when I started hearing an electronic tone coming from behind me, where my room would be. I mute the TV and go to my room to investigate, and I hear the sound coming from my cupboard under my TV. I opened it up, and a handheld racing game was turned on, and I was hearing the sound of the device. I turn it off, thinking it's kind of weird that it turned itself on when I started hearing static coming from the family room. I go back into the family room and notice that the old sound system is turned on. This sound system could play cassette tapes, CDs, vinyl records, and radio. In order to turn it on, you had to press a button that would stay pressed in and would turn off when you press the button again, releasing it and allowing it to pop out. The sound system button was fully pressed in, and I hadn't turned it on. I walk up to the sound system and turn it off. Right after I turn it off, I hear what sounds like little kids running and giggling down the hallway behind me. Since this was starting to look like the opening scene in a horror movie and there was no way I was going to go back to my room to investigate by myself, I decided to call some friends over so we could play video games. Nothing like that has ever happened before or since. I'm not sure what caused it, but it certainly freaked me out. When I was 13, I was on an ATV with my two older sisters, one 15 and the other 18. We were going to my grandma's, which was less than 2 kilometers away from my parents' place. We were traveling through our fields, but on the way, I suggested we go around the fence so we didn't have to open the gates. It was pretty much the same path, just a bit off to the side. We had gates because this was our pasture for the cows. As we got to the middle of the field, we all noticed something sitting on top of the hill we were about to climb. On top of this hill, we had a somewhat big pile of rocks from working the fields a long time ago. We slowed to a crawl because it looked human. We thought maybe a calf fell and was stuck, or maybe it was my uncle who looked after the cattle. But this thing was sitting weird, basically like how Spider-Man perches over buildings, crouched down on top of a rock. As we were sitting there trying to figure out what we were seeing, this thing slowly stood up, and my heart sank. Its arms were grossly long. I screamed to stop and instantly jumped from the front of the SUV to the driver, replacing my sister. As we were switching, this thing started running at us, but it was running weird. Its arms were swaying back and forth like a normal runner, but because of how long the arms were, it looked weird. You would think it would run on the long arms, but it didn't. It was running fast. I turned around and shot straight through the field. My sisters were screaming that it was still coming, but I honestly could not look back at this thing. I just said, "Don't look at it." We rounded the corner, and that's the last we saw it. After that corner, it trailed to my parents' house. As we got home, I crashed the ATV into the deck, trying to get in as fast as we could. We were so scared that my parents actually believed us. They called all the family to warn them if it was a trespasser. They said nobody had seen anything or anyone in the fields. Now I want to describe this thing. It was tall, skinny, and wore no clothes. Just a body was what we could see, grayish in color, and the head wasn't shaped like a human. It was thin and small. We were about 30 to 40 meters from this thing. It was during the day too, and it happened in Alberta. My conclusion is that a bear broke its front legs jumping down from a tree. The legs healed but not fully, so it couldn't run on the front paws. And due to the front legs being broken, it couldn't eat right, so it thinned out and lost fur. But this thing was tall and skinny. I didn't think it was a person just because of the arms. Also, I live in the country on a farm, and this all happened on private land that was fenced off. So I was walking to a friend's house around 11 p.m. It's pitch black except for the occasional street light. I live in a pretty rural town, so things are kind of spread apart. I was halfway there when I walked by this insurance office. The alarms inside were going woo 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 woo, and there was a parked car running with a driver looking around anxiously, and these two big dudes dressed all in black were coming out the front door of this office, carrying something massive into the backseat. I made the rookie mistake of letting these guys see me, i.e., I stood there like a deer in headlights, watching the whole thing instead of hiding, and one of them spotted me. "Hey!" one of them shouted. I just straight up booked it down the road as fast as I could, and I didn't look back. I could hear the sound of footsteps behind me and the engine of this car being revved up. At this point, the only sound I could hear was my own heartbeat. After about a solid 2-minute all-out sprint. Laugh at me all you want for only running 120 seconds. When you're running for your life, you give it everything you have. This sprint could have qualified me for the 100-meter dash. I finally glanced behind me, and no one was there. I was completely winded, and I felt like I was going to throw up. I stood there, trying to catch my breath. I thought, I probably shouldn't be standing here on the sidewalk, so I made the wise choice of getting off the main road and ducking behind some shrubs to catch my breath. Not 1 minute later, this car comes up real slow. All the windows down. They're only going about 5 miles per hour, 8 kilometers per hour for everyone else. It's the same car from earlier, and they're looking for me. I lay down flat on my belly, completely engulfed by the shrubs and the muddy terrain. They finished driving by, but I still wait about 10 minutes before finally getting up and continuing my walk. The rest of the walk was pretty uneventful, but I called the police to let them know about what just happened when I got to my friend's house. He let me stay the night so I wouldn't have to walk back in the darkness. On the way back home the next morning, I walked by the same insurance office with shattered glass everywhere. 3 police cars were parked out front. That classic yellow tape for a crime scene that you see in the movies, and some random woman sobbing her eyes out.